So I know this sounds a little bit odd, but because you wrote the foreword and I wrote the book, but I wanted to talk with you and just have a conversation that we could record, just about your thoughts. I mean, you've expressed a lot of them to me, but so that people could hear us talking about some of the different, because there's a lot of different topics in the book that I know you're aware of and that are part of my journey that are also part of yours, although our journeys are different. So anyway, just off the top of your head, first question, like what are the things that struck you about the book that immediately hit you?
You used Escher on the front cover, who is one of my favorite all-time genius artists. And
actually, that's original art.
I know, but it's an Escher type.
Total
no
Escher.
question. And it has a transformation of shapes, which Escher is very famous for. Yep. And it's called a spiritual evolution. Evolution used to be a bad word when we were growing up. And but it just means change over time. Mm-hmm. And the book is centered on your transformational journey over time.
Yep.
So let me ask you, where did you come from, and who were you writing the book for?
Where I came from is a longer story, and a lot of that I talk about in the beginning of the book. I'll give you the short version. My parents, they became Christian or followers of Jesus when they were older in life. And as a result, I think they were a little bit more, with my dad, I could definitely use this word, strict. My mom, not so much, but certainly more conservative and more concerned about their kids not growing up the way they did. So because they didn't come to faith until they were in their late 30s. And so they were, I think, more, not just proactive, but it was more like, this is what we do, this is what you believe, kind of almost dictated to us. So I was raised in a community church that was, and you'll remember this, at the time, evangelical was like a forward, progressive kind of thinking
very
word.
Much so, yes.
If you really wanted to be like known as a true follower, you were fundamental. So we went to a fundamental Bible-believing church.
Right. And there were a lot of good things about.
Yeah, good and bad.
Yep.
Absolutely. And but it was, I think, more the feeling of it was pretty strict, and my dad was pretty, what we would say, legalistic. And I think that really had a lot to do, not so much with his theology as much as it had to do with his personality. He just was a controlling man. He felt like the best way he could help his kids as a parent was to control them. Yeah. And we all three of us rebelled. And so, but I pretty much was apathetic toward all of it. I went to the Sunday schools and the vacation Bible schools and church and had to do that all the time. But really got in with a different crowd that really wasn't much to do with church. And so I really didn't care that much about it. They knew I went, and I was like, yeah, John's a church guy, but he smokes pot with us, so he's okay. So it wasn't until my summer between my junior and senior year where I think had, on an experience level, the first dramatic encounter with Jesus. And even then, it was really based a lot on information because it was the first time in my life I'd had a lot of questions answered that hadn't been answered before. And I saw a reality in people's lives that I hadn't seen before. It wasn't a dead faith in, because they were younger people and they were people that I respected, and I saw life there. Mm-hmm. So there was a change for me in terms, pretty dramatic change for me. In fact, again, back in the day, all my friends said, John's a Jesus freak now, because that was the term. He's a Jesus freak. So this was 1971. So, right, that dates me. So yeah, that's a little bit about where I came from. From there, I went on to Bible college and to seminary, and was schooled in kind of the evangelical North American Christian theology, generally speaking.
Sure.
And then ended up teaching a lot of those same things
for a lot of years.
Roles. Yeah, in a lot of years and a lot of different roles, as a teacher, as a pastor, as a college pastor, most of it. something that you and I also have in common.
Yep.
But so yeah, did that. And the second question was?
So that spans your experience, and now you write a book for...
Oh, who I wrote it for.
Whom?
Well, at first I didn't think I was writing a book. I was really writing, it was more cathartic to me. I was on a photo shoot in Norway, and...
Oh, what you need to understand, John is a professional photographer, nature photographer.
Yeah, that's my vocation, that's my job, that's what I do. So anyway, I was in Norway, and I was in a cabin on a fjord, literally, it was awesome. I was 50 feet from the fjord. I was right there on the shoreline. But it was pouring rain, and it poured rain for 3 days. I had no internet, I had no TV, I had nothing. I had already read the book that I took with me for the trip, so I had nothing to do. So I started writing on the back of pieces of scrap paper that I had with me. And it was, what I started writing was more of an apology or a confession for things that I had believed and taught that were changing in me. And that would be, in some sense, the earliest, the roughest of drafts of the chapter, I'm right, you're not. Yeah. And so at the time, I didn't think it was a book. It was more cathartic of me, just me and God in the cabin talking, and me writing out stuff that I used to think and believe about him. My insistence of being right, and all that. And so when it wasn't for anybody, it was really that. When it started to morph into the idea like, hey, maybe there's a book here, then it was almost to someone like me, someone who loved Jesus, wanted to follow Jesus, but found themselves in a tension that they couldn't sustain, and that was their beliefs about Jesus made them afraid of him, and to a point where I want to trust you, but I'm having really a difficult time trusting you, right? Yep. And you just can't sustain that. Something's going to give. You're either going to walk away and say it's not worth it or whatever. But I think on a personal level, I did love him, and I in my heart I knew that I wanted to follow him, but the path I was on was leading me more toward despair than it was toward joy or life or any of the things that you read about in the Bible. It was the other direction.
And you've been teaching all these years,
yeah,
the very things that were driving you now toward despair.
Yeah. Now, and all of what I was teaching wasn't necessarily
wrong.
Theology.
Yeah.
I mean,
or wrong.
Or exactly. I mean, there was a lot of good to it, but there was a lot of bad to it. And the bad, I really would try to avoid teaching. I wouldn't want to talk about it because, if I stand up and I say to a class at the university, the Bible college I'm teaching at, I'm not sure I believe in hell. Well, I lose my job teaching, and I lose my credibility anywhere else. So to admit that I'm having those kind of questions, and I'm not saying that.
Or hell as we've understood it.
Right, as we've understood it, correct, yeah. So.
Yeah. One of the things that I loved about the book is that it does speak to my history, my heritage, my world. And for those of us who grew up in the modern evangelical frame of reference, fundamentalist, modern evangelical, you found a way, because of the openness of your own journey, to use language that I could identify with. And you did it kindly. And,
Thanks.
There's a lot of folks out there that are in this transition. They're asking the questions, and up comes all the fury, which frankly is legitimate to a great degree.
Right.
And they go through a mean stage where they're basically going to shoot everybody that was in the pack of which they were a part. And that's not helpful. But your book's very helpful, and you tackle, I think part of it is because you taught it. And so you're very familiar with the information, which our people were all about the information.
Right, for sure.
We'd rather have information than to trust somebody. And so because you're so familiar with it, you knew the points of your own journey that created the tension that drove you actually away from relationship rather than toward it.
Yep.
And you're very honest about it. Your apologies in the sense of I need to apologize, and this is a frame that you use throughout the book where you'll say, this is what I taught and this is what I believed, but I don't anymore. Mm-hmm. And I recognize that what I taught has had negative or destructive consequences in the faith journeys of others, which is part of the dilemma of a teacher to begin with.
Sure.
And I want to say that I admire the courage for someone who has done something for a long period of time and changed their mind and done it in a public way, because that's not easy. Do you remember when F.F. Bruce changed his mind about Galatians 3?
Oh, yeah.
And he got immediately called a neo-Orthodox.
I do remember that. I can't believe you brought that up.
Oh, and
Out of Princeton.
I tell you, at his age to do that was remarkable to me.
Yeah.
And there was a firestorm because it had to do with recognizing that women had the same access to position and authority based on the Galatians passage. And
he was a little bit more of a scholar and a little bit more well known than me.
Yeah. But
yeah.
again, the same thing applies. I mean, I think a lot of times people are afraid because they have a position, they can't change their mind, they've been identified as believing a certain system, and for them to change their mind includes now job security issues and all kinds of other things, which I think job security has more impact on interpretation of Scripture than almost anything.
I was fortunate in that because my job was photography.
Yeah.
The teaching was always just something I did part-time.
Yeah.
And so that allowed me maybe a little bit more freedom, a little bit more space to do that. Yeah. And another thing I wanted to make a quick comment on, the people that have experienced that, like that anger or that fury, right? That was another reason why at the very beginning of the book, I deal with the whole I'm right, you're not, that had to be dealt with in me before I could even take a step forward and give myself, first of all, personally, give myself permission to begin to actually dig into the questions that I had, but then to also admit it, because I didn't want to just transfer the I'm right, you're not, because I had a different paradigm, but hold on to that and then just do the same thing from a different side of the fence.
Yeah, no, the goal is not to create a new division.
Yeah. Right.
Which is, we've tried that for a long time. It doesn't work.
We only have 40,000 of them.
I think what Richard Rohr says is important. As you transcend, you include. You know, and so, you know, I always identify modern evangelicals as my people for that reason. Because I don't want to create a new division. And I'm not saying everything you believe is wrong. I'm saying there are elements of what we all believe that need to be challenged, because they don't work.
Yeah, and if we don't have a conversation about it, how's it ever going to change? How's it ever going to grow?
That's a hard thing for people that come out of a background like mine, where certainty was the goal. It felt like a house of cards, and so you had to challenge anybody that had a different perspective about anything, and you tackle those things. You tackle the issues of heaven and hell and justice. I loved your chapters on justice.
Thanks.
Yeah, and very important conversation, becoming even more important with the kind of shift that I think is happening in the planet. And so you wrote this with the intent of creating a safe space for a conversation, made safe because of your own journey and your own apology. You're basically saying, I need to ask for forgiveness because of the things that I've taught that I no longer believe to be true.
Right.
Yeah, and I've read it, and it's very orthodox. In fact, I think it's more orthodox than where you were.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
I would agree with that.
Yeah,
I would.
Uh-huh.
And again, I don't mean that in that like I think I'm right now. I'm not sure what I'm right about, but I think I've moved more toward what would be considered orthodoxy, even by most of our modern evangelical friends.
True. And a lot of that is grounded in the thinking of the early church and and you're speaking from that. So, what kind of response are you getting?
Yeah, that's been kind of fun. I mean, there aren't a whole lot of people that know about the book yet.
Well, it's new.
Right. So, but well, first of all, I've had maybe 3 or 4 people that have read it that I know don't agree with me, that are friends.
Yeah.
And they're good enough friends that they've said, yeah, I'll read it, because they care about me. They want to hear about my journey, even though we've talked about it. And all of them have responded in a really positive way. One so much, in fact, that said, you're making me rethink some things that I thought I disagreed with. And I said, that's awesome. I'm not trying to convince you of anything, but if you're willing to rethink them, let's talk.
Yeah.
So their response has actually been good. They feel they don't feel threatened by it.
Good.
But it's clarified for them the differences, and at the same time, I think they get the sense that I'm not trying to convert them to the way that I think, because I don't have that agenda anymore of, I got to be right.
Yeah.
Right. Then there's others that I think that you mentioned that are more similar to us, that have been on this path, in this journey, and they found it to be a dead end, or unsustainable, unfulfilling, whatever. And they have been changing. And I've had probably a dozen people that have read the book and then come back and ordered like 10, which means they want to give it to their friends.
Yeah.
And so that's a great, I think, for me, an affirmation that I'm saying something that is meeting something in them.
Yeah.
And they want to share it. So, in fact, I think a friend of ours in Texas, Marianne, she's actually going to have, and this has happened several times, where she's ordered a bunch of copies and they're going to do a study of the book. So that's great. To this point, I haven't had a whole lot of people, I haven't had anybody that has been irate about it or said you're a heretic. I'm sure that'll come someday, but I don't think any of those people even know the book exists yet, so they haven't read it. So, and maybe they never will, I don't know.
Well, I wrote the foreword, so you might be in trouble right off the bat.
Yeah, they won't even read the book, they'll just assume it, right?
Exactly.
Guilt by
They
association.
don't read my books, I assume
That's right. Guilt by association. Your last name begins with.
Yeah.
No. Anyway, so I think the response has been good. A good friend of ours, Linda,
Yes.
she has been a champion for the book.
Yep.
She bought a case and put them in her car, and she's selling them out on the road, kind of thing. And I'm like,
how cool is that?
Yeah, it's awesome. It's terrific.
Which means it is finding a place that's important. And I'm pretty familiar with the gamut of material that's available, the content that's out there.
Yeah.
And this was something that needed to find a place and a voice, and I'm grateful for what you've done here.
Thanks.
And
it means a lot to me.
yeah,
It
well,
does.
good. I'm honored that I got to write the foreword for it.
Oh,
So
gosh. And I feel like you get asked a million times, so I'm
I get asked
grateful.
a couple million times.
Yeah. I'm really grateful. That one of the things when you asked me about the audience, I don't know if this is necessarily audience, but one of the things that I hope that the book would be is a bridge, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, as I've been on this more recent journey in the last 10, 15 years, and these shifts have begun to take place for me in my view of God and my view of life, myself, etc. I've become aware of a whole stream of books and people that have been talking about this for hundreds of years,
hundreds,
right?
Thousands,
and even more modern ones, right?
Yep.
And so there's those, and then there's the pool from which I came from, and all these books that keep talking about these things the same way. So when I go with a different thought or a question to them, they immediately are just talking about the same thing. And so my hope was that there'd be something that could say, here's a connection, okay, from someone who knows this, very familiar with this narrative, saying, this narrative I think is better, and can I show you the journey that it took me? I'm not saying you need to end up in the same place as me, but if I can show you the journey of what it took for me to get there, the questions, the struggles, I think that could be really helpful for people.
Sure. So without going into a deep dive, give a little sense of the scope of what some of those questions are. They involve this and this and this and this.
That's actually, pretty easy because it's pretty just the chapter titles.
Yeah.
So, the journey was, I've said this before, and I even use the metaphor in the book. I think of my life almost like dominoes. And I remember watching these guys on YouTube. They spend a year setting up dominoes, and then you watch for 30 minutes what they just spent a year setting up. It's fascinating. I love it, that kind of stuff. But so the first domino for me was the I'm right. I had to let go of that. I had to give myself permission to go, you might be wrong about all this stuff. And again, I was told before, like when you have those kind of doubts, that's bad.
I know.
Don't entertain those doubts. Yeah. Like that's the enemy. Quench those, like get rid of those. And when I finally gave myself permission to go, wait a minute, okay, I need to pursue this so that I can at least have some kind of, maybe not closure, but at least some kind of better understanding of why I'm struggling so much with this. Mm-hmm. So my journey was more theological. So the big questions, the first domino for me was, who is God? And you had a lot to do with that. Because I was, for years, working in the Gospel of John and was coming to realize that God is relationship. And this is the craziest thing. I've told you this a long time ago. When I first got your book and I read it, it was just a few months after it had come out, and then I'd never heard of it. I don't think very many people had. You were selling them out of your trunk of your car.
Exactly
right. And so as I read it, I just kept going, yes, because you were articulating things that I had been thinking and I didn't know how to articulate. And the weird thing for me was, why did I not think, this is condemning. Why did I not think Trinity?
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking Father-Son relationship, but I never thought Trinity, because that wasn't where I started in the way I thought about God. God was, I agreed to that in lip service in terms of this is what I believed. If someone had asked me, I'd say, yes, I believe that God is Father, Son, and Spirit. But that had no impact on me, really. Mm-hmm. And so that would be the first domino. When I started to think that God is triune, that he's a relationship, that this is the deepest truth of his essence, of his being, this just changes the trajectory of everything. Because my trajectory had come out of, I agree with that, but I really talk to God like he's an individual. Right? And whenever I read the word God in the Bible, he's an individual. And and then on it went. So all of my descriptions of God were descriptions of an individual, abstract, whatever. So that would be the first ones. And then from there, the other dominoes were topics like justice, relationship, love, my concept of who the Father is. But then what I did, ultimately, Paul, this for me, and you know this because you read it, it all comes through better understanding the incarnation, who Jesus is.
Right.
Again, that would be something that I would, had you asked me 15 years ago, who is Jesus, I had the right academic answers.
Right.
But the things that I attached with it were so, I was going to say bizarre, kind of bizarre, but they were weird.
But they sound right when you're inside that frame of reference. Because you've normalized something, and it's like, well, there are things about God that are too deep and mysterious.
That's it. You get the pat too. You get the pat. It's okay.
Pat.
It's
like,
okay.
It's you don't fully have the mind of Christ yet, like I do. but once you do, then you'll understand how these incoherent things actually fit.
Right.
And we weren't allowed to ask those questions.
And we had friends that were good people that weren't as condescending as that. I also met people that were as condescending as that. Yeah. But that also brings up the other big thing that kind of weaves all through the book. The thing that first initiated the whole thing was the fact that I began to realize that my life was a life that was operated more out of fear than anything else.
Correct.
Fear was the biggest deal for me. It was the biggest motivator to me. Mine was
fear and shame.
Yeah.
Those two.
Well, maybe I'll get to shame some.
It definitely show up, let me tell you.
It does. It has. So, but it was fear. Yeah. So that's how I start the book, and that's how I end the book. Is coming back to that. So, what difference does this make? Well, I'm finding that fear. It's not just that I'm finding courage to overcome my fears, so that the fears are still there, but I can live in spite of them. They're actually dissolving. Yes. So which is better?
So this is actually changing your life.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And not just changing your mind.
Exactly.
I know.
And that's huge.
So many of us were stuck just in the thought world. Even if when we went home, we had all this conflict, we had all these unresolved things, we couldn't figure things out, but we knew the truth. and the whole point of this is as we grow and move, and you've got it in your book, that it changes the way we're able to love and changes the way that we're able to be free in terms of relationship and kind. It moves us back towards the truth of who we are. Yeah. That is grounded in our understanding of who God is.
Yeah, and over the last 11, 12 years, I've seen that in you. That I'm incredibly grateful for and thankful for.
Me too.
No, I mean, because you've borne witness to this, that there is life here, because your life is different. Your life is changed, and I see it being real, not just a mask that I put on because I'm famous or I'm wealthy or I'm whatever.
So the topic of justice and how you dealt with it, I think it's going to be really helpful for a lot of us. And I've said in recent weeks how much we as evangelicals love Moses more than we love Jesus. We identify with eye for an eye, and we had a theology about the atonement and about the crucifixion and all of that, where justice was seen in a legal kind of sense, and very violent way. And you get to unpack that. So I want to just read some of your confessions that are out of that section, and as a way of piquing people's interest in terms of just sort of the topics around which you were talking. So one of your confessions: in my former version of justice, if someone acted with evil or behaved immorally, what I really wanted was for them to be punished. Another confession: I thought that justice for a victim was synonymous with punishing the oppressor. Or how about, I confess I defined God's justice only in the context of sin, evil, or wrongdoing. I confess I did not think of justice as a relational quality, which that one is really significant. And that goes back to your view of God. So all of these conversations are entwined. And, the systems of this world, both the religious systems and the political systems, they want to define justice in terms of retribution or punitive response. Yeah. And as you unpack it, and the more that we dive into this in terms of the goodness of God, and we see justice as a relationship that does not, like MacDonald would say, this is not a God who stands idly by while anything that is not of love's kind remains in us. And so we're dealing with a strong and fiery response on the part of God, but we've defined it as the person is so identified with their behavior and their imperfection behavior that that the punishment is meted out against them with the purpose of destroying them because of what they've done.
Right.
As opposed to, there is this whole reality that justice is an expression of the goodness. It is just love. It is just love. And the fury of God is against anything that would harm the one that he loves, which would be you. And for those of us who've grown up in a world where our behavior was the definition of our identity, and then our misbehavior was the revelation of our destiny, justice was just retribution. Yeah. And so no wonder you lived in fear. No wonder that fear was one of the strongest motivators, because we had to deal with the justice of God. And we had we had like Janus, the two faces of God, right?
Yeah. He becomes more, he actually becomes vindictive.
Oh.
Right?
And one of those things that really bothers me is that because of the way that we've seen the atonement, we've seen that there's a God behind Jesus who is actually the one that needs to be appeased and sacrificed to. Yeah. And because Jesus doesn't, somehow he's able to walk amongst us and look on sin and become sin, as Paul says, But this God requires something, and he uses violence to accomplish love. And it's like, how does that even work? And that is so incongruous in terms of my relationship with my own kids that I would even begin to think that violence then becomes an act of love. Yeah. But in our theology it did. And you unpack a lot of those kinds of issues with regard to the justice of God in a way that I think is very it's comprehensive in a way that's I can apprehend it.
Thanks.
And yeah,
that would be another goal. I mean, I didn't try to write an academic book.
Right.
I mean, I wanted to at least know what I was talking about, but this is more something. Can you comprehend this? More like the bridge.
Yeah. And then does it change anything?
Yeah.
So much of theology just didn't change anything except make you right.
Yeah. Win an argument.
Uh-huh.
So so justice then, and this, I tried to actually show the progression in my thought. So, but I'm going to say where it finally took me.
Yeah, please.
That heaven's violent revolt against our sin was to submit to it.
Yep.
And like that just turns everything on its head.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely does.
Because it's not God passively going, I'll let you do this to me. No, he's actively saying, this is the way I'm going to fix this.
Right.
By submitting to you.
Right. Which was not part of our theology either. We didn't have a God who submitted.
No, as soon as you use those words, we kind of get the garlic and get away, right? But justice looks, again, for me, this has roots in the way, just the family dynamic of my house that I grew up in. The dynamic of justice in my home was really, that was part of what fueled and even made it more readily acceptable to, embrace this theology that had God this way. So because, and again, I think my dad's just passing on what he,
of course,
right, what he learned and what he knew.
Yeah.
So, but again, it's not just a Christian thing.
No.
Because there's karma. Even if there is a God, the life force of the universe will get you back, right? It's about, and we have our texts. God is a vengeful God, and blah 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 blah. But it's the meaning that we fill into those things really comes from, I think, a really dark place. Because, like you said, if we did this with our children, we would, at the very least, be called bad parents. We'd probably be thrown in jail.
Yeah.
Right.
So that, like the Romans passage, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. But he defines vengeance as repaying evil with good. Yeah. So goodness is the vengeance of God. Yeah. It's just like, well, we just didn't see that. Yeah. And that's part of the whole reason you wrote the book, is because there were so many things we didn't see, and you didn't see.
Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah. And they need to be talked about.
Thanks.
Yep.